Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about CICD, continuous integration, and continuous delivery or continuous deployment using Jenkins and Selenium WebDriver. We have these interview questions ready for you. What is CICD and why is it important? CICD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment, is a practice that automates the software development lifecycle from code integration to deployment. CI focuses on frequent code integrations into a shared repository with automated builds and tests. CD extends CI by automatically deploying changes to testing or production environments. Importance: it accelerates development, improves code quality, reduces integration issues, and enables faster feedback loops. What is Jenkins, and how does it fit into a CI/CD pipeline? Answer: Jenkins is an open source automation server that automates the build, test, and deployment phases of the software development lifecycle. It acts as the orchestrator in a CI/CD pipeline, triggering jobs based on events like code commits. What is just Selenium WebDriver and how is it used in CI/CD? Selenium WebDriver is a tool for automating web browser interactions. In CI/CD, it's used to automate UI tests, ensuring that web applications function correctly after each code change. How do you integrate Selenium WebDriver tests into a Jenkins pipeline? Answer is you can integrate Selenium tests by creating a Jenkins job that executes your test scripts, for example, written in Java, Python, etc. This job can be triggered after a successful build. Example, Java with Maven. In Jenkins, create a Maven project job. Configure the job to point to your Git repository. In the goals and options section, enter clean test. Ensure your pom.xml contains the Selenium WebDriver dependencies and the Surefire plugin to run tests. How do you handle dependencies in your Selenium tests within Jenkins? Use dependencies management tools like Maven, Java, pip, Python, or npm Node.js. Jenkins will automatically download dependencies during the build process. Example, Maven pom.xml file has dependencies of Selenium, Java, and testng. How do you configure Jenkins to run tests on different browsers? Use parameterized builds in Jenkins to pass browser names as parameters. Modify your Selenium test to accept the browser parameter and instantiate the appropriate WebDriver. Use Docker containers to have multiple environments with different browsers. Example, Java. Parameters, add parameters, browser. This is parameterization discussed here. Add test, these are annotations, parameters, tests. And we have public void test example method, string browser, WebDriver driver. If browser dot equals ignore case Chrome, driver equal new Chrome driver. Else if browser equal Firefox, driver equal new Firefox driver. Other browsers you can also add like Edge, etc. And then you give your test logic and then quit the session. How do you handle test data in your Selenium tests within Jenkins? Store test data in external files, for example, CSV, JSON, Excel, and read them in your tests. Use environment variables in Jenkins to pass sensitive data. Environment variables can be used to pass sensitive data. Use test data management tools. How do you generate and view test reports in Jenkins? Use test frameworks like TestNG or JUnit, which generate XML reports. Install plugins like JUnit plugin or TestNG plugin in Jenkins to parse and display reports. They TestNG and JUnit generate XML reports, and plugins like JUnit plugin or TestNG plugin in Jenkins parse and display those reports, XML reports. Use Allure reports for better visual reports. Allure reports can be used for. Okay, how do you handle environment variables in Jenkins? Configure environment variables in the Jenkins job configuration. Use the environment inject env inject plugin for more advanced environment variable management. Well, use credential binding plugin for secure environment variables. How do you handle parallel test execution in Jenkins? Use parallel execution capabilities of your test framework. For example, TestNG's parallel attribute. Fair enough. TestNG has parallel attribute. Use Jenkins parallel test executor plugin. Fair enough. Use Selenium Grid or cloud testing platforms like Sauce Labs or Browser Stack. 3 competitors are available in the market: Selenium Grid, Sauce Labs, Browser Stack. What is Jenkins pipeline? Pipeline as code. Answer is Jenkins pipeline is a suite of plugins that supports implementing and integrating continuous delivery pipelines into Jenkins. It allows you to define your CICD workflow as code in a Jenkins file. So it will take us to dzone website. How do you write a Jenkins file for a Selenium test pipeline? Create a Jenkins file in your repository. Define stages for build, test, and deployment. Example Jenkins file, which is a Groovy script. Pipeline agent any stages, stage checkout, steps, Git credentials ID, your Git credentials URL, your Git repo, stage build, steps, shall mvn clean install d skip tests, stage test, steps, shall maven test, post always JUnit, target surefire reports. XML. How do you handle failures in your Jenkins pipeline? Use post sections in your Jenkins file to define actions on success, failure, or always. And send notifications, for example, email or Slack on failures. Implement retry mechanisms for flaky tests. This is the process of handling failures in your Jenkins pipeline. 3. Use post sections in your Jenkins file, send notifications on failures, and implement retry mechanism. How do you handle security in Jenkins? Enable security features in Jenkins, for example, authentication and authorization. Security features. Use credentials plugins to store sensitive information securely. Okay. And restrict access to Jenkins jobs and configurations. So 3 things that enable security features in Jenkins and use credentials plugins to store sensitive information securely and restrict access to Jenkins jobs and configuration. How do you integrate Jenkins with version control systems like Git? Install the Git plugin in Jenkins. There are plugins. Configure the Git repository URL and credentials in the Jenkins job. And use webhooks to trigger Jenkins builds on code commits. Webhooks are used to trigger Jenkins builds on code commits. How do you use Jenkins with Docker for Selenium testing? Create Docker images with Selenium WebDriver and browser dependencies. Docker images can be created. 2. Use Jenkins with Docker for Selenium testing. Use Docker plugin in Jenkins to run tests in Docker containers. Use Selenium Grid within Docker containers for parallel testing. Selenium Grid can be used in Docker containers for parallel testing. What are Jenkins plugins and why are they important? Jenkins plugins extend the functionality of Jenkins by adding new features and integrations. They are essential for integrating Jenkins with various tools and technologies. How do you monitor and troubleshoot Jenkins builds? Because Jenkins plugins are really very important. Coming back to the 18th question, how do you monitor and troubleshoot Jenkins builds? Check Jenkins build logs for errors. Use Jenkins monitoring plugins to track build performance. Jenkins is a whole wide world. Jenkins monitoring plugins to track build performance. Monitor system resources, CPU memory on the Jenkins server. And then, how do you handle flaky tests in your CI/CD pipeline? Implement retry mechanisms in your tests. Use test stability analysis tools. Test stability analysis tools are available. Isolate and fix the root cause of flaky tests. What are some best practices for using Jenkins with Selenium WebDriver? Keep your Jenkins file under version control. Use parameterized builds for flexibility. Okay, so best practices are using Jenkins with Selenium WebDriver. Keep your Jenkins file under version control. Okay, first thing, use web parameterized builds for flexibility. Implement proper error handling and reporting. Use Docker for consistent test environments. Use Selenium Grid or cloud testing platforms for scaling. Secure your Jenkins instance and credentials. Thank you very much.